What's up guys, hello to Football Talk here. We're knee deep into draft season, about 3 weeks away from Roger Goodell putting the Las Vegas Raiders on the clock, who have been locked into Indiana quarterback Fernando Mendoza pretty much since he secured the first overall pick, but everything else is still about to be determined. Personally, as you've hopefully followed, I'm getting towards the end of my annual positional draft breakdown series with extensive scouting reports on nearly 150 prospects altogether once we've finished. And I talk about a lot of the guys there that I'm a fan of, but as always I wanted to dedicate one video to my guys, meaning players I'm high on than where they find themselves in consensus boards. I'll refer to mockdraftdatabase.com here as the source in comparison to my personal rankings, highlight one name for each of the 11 position groups, plus bring up a couple of honorable mentions, typically one in the earlier and later rounds respectively. Just real quick, if you enjoy this type of content, I will have a mock draft coming out a few days before the draft, and then an 8-part series analyzing the drafts and off seasons for all 32 NFL teams, one division at a time here on my YouTube channel, and along with all my written content at helloswithfootballtalk.com. So please leave a like and hit the bell if you want to hear more from me. Let's dive in now, and we'll start with a name that almost all college fans are familiar with, since he was a projected top 10 pick last summer, and that is Garrett Nussmeier, the quarterback from LSU. 6'2", 205 pounds, a redshirt senior, he was a top 100 recruit in 2021, had to wait his turn behind Jaden Daniels before getting his chance to beat the guy in 2024 when he threw for over 4,000 yards and 29 touchdowns compared to 12 interceptions. Last year, LSU fell off as a program. Nussmeier got banged up and kind of forgotten about because he took a step back himself, but there's a lot to like about him still. Very clean in his drops and so smooth mechanically. I'd call his arm strength more so average, but he understands the pace he needs to put behind the ball, rips those timing-based throws, and kept the slot feed a big part of the offense when he took over. Only officially starting 23 games, but he's a coach's son who clearly understands the game at an advanced level for a college quarterback. You see him make pre-snap checks, and he understands the purpose of concepts, shows the processing skills to read a concept to the field and then get back to someone on the backside, anticipates at a high level, and consistently places the ball to where his targets can maximize yardage after the catch. You really like his pocket presence, how he hitches up against pressure off the edge and finds clean platforms to release from, along with just being willing to stand in there to take shots, and there's enough flexibility along with the field vision to find his receivers working towards green grass and secondary action plays. Now, he predetermines some shots against pressure looks, when I believe he sees the safety rotation actually, and I generally like the aggressive decision making, but he turns down some layups where the second level provides excess space underneath, or there's a leverage threat to be had for him. And I'll say here, he overestimates his mobility where NFL speed will hunt him down. That's where he's kind of reminiscent of Brock Purdy coming out of college, including being on the small end of the spectrum. Maybe not quite as twitchy inside the pocket, but Nuss actually is further along mentally, and may have a little more juice in his arm. I have him as QB3, just like consensus boards, but I think the gap between Alabama's Ty Simpson and him is actually smaller than the one to Mendoza, who I don't have as a top 5 prospect either, like some others do. A couple of honorable mentions here. I still want to watch a few more guys to hopefully get a little excited about, because this is a pretty bad quarterback class, but I do like Cole Payton from North Dakota State as a developmental prospect, just a one-year starter, lefty, who double clutched and escaped the pocket way too often, with a massive time to throw, but has an NFL level arm and impressive athleticism, nice touch underneath, has plenty of those timing-based throws to the far sideline, stands strong in the pocket, and then is a strong, fast runner. And then it's been quite the roller coaster for Jalen Daniels from Kansas as a 6th-year senior, but I don't mind taking a fly on him late in the draft. Inconsistent accuracy and needs to operate the pocket with more subtle movements, but has plenty of big-time throws on tape, sees the field pretty well generally, and incredibly elusive and creative out of structure. Next up we're going to running back with Robert Henry Jr. from UTSA. 5'9", 200 pounds, another redshirt senior, one of my pleasant surprises in a fairly weak running back class, and I promise it's going to get better from here soon. Steadily improved his production in 3 years with the Roadrunners after joining them as a JUCO transfer with nearly 2,800 yards and 30 touchdowns from scrimmage. I was quite impressed with his mental capacity to identify defensive fronts and anticipate post-snap movement by the defense, capable of promptly getting his cleats into the ground and transitioning from horizontal to vertical movement and zone concepts, keeps his pad square on gap man plays, patiently following pullers, and really dropping his hips if more of an abrupt change of course is needed. I was kinda shocked to find out that he had the worst 10-yard split among this year's running back crop at the combine at 162, because he routinely captured the corner against his level of competition. The that'll be challenged differently now than it was against AAC competition. But excellent decision maker overall, has some real wiggle in the hole, crosses over safeties with dead legs and other moves, plenty of whoopee tackles slip off his waist as they try to wrestle him to the ground, which a 4 to 5 yards after contact average last year speaks to. His pass game involvement was just really limited, where he saw him overextend too much in protection, and then all he caught were swings and flat routes for the most part. So if his future coaching staff can clean up his technique and diversify his route tree, will determine how much we see him on the field early on, but a 5% drop rate is solid. He's my RB9 and I'd be fine with him anytime on day 3, while right now he's right on the fringe of even being drafted, so he could be a big time value in a class with questions about everyone past Notre Dame superstar Jeremiah Love. Honorable mentions, Jonah Coleman from Washington. He's actually my RB3, with the other Irish back Jadaron Price being sandwiched between the two. Built super low to the ground, his eyes and feet are mirrored at all times, bleeds out rushing concepts, reliable pass catcher, fundamentally sound and consistently wins with leverage as a personal protector. He just lacks any type of breakaway speed. And then a real deep cut, Dean Connor from Houston. His conceptual understanding, vision and pacing all very advanced for college back. He runs behind his pads and with an incredible level of determination, caught 140 passes over the last few years combined, and was beating pretty much everyone during Shrine Bowl practices as a route runner. Simply doesn't have the mass you'd like from a power back, or the speed and open field moves to make up for it. Back to the SEC now, with Oklahoma wide receiver Deion Burks. Only 5'10", 180 pounds, another redshirt senior. The shortcomings are pretty obvious, looking at his size, where he tends to drift in some of his routes, sub 30-inch arms, and maybe labeled as a slot only. Despite running 4.3 flat at the combine, when asked to run vertical routes on the outside, you rarely saw him stack and get on top of corners. But having said that, I want to compliment him for largely eliminating the clap attack tendencies that he showed at Purdue, and he's really improved his ability to take contact at the catch point, posting a 56% contested catch rate over his 2 years in the SEC, with a 42.5-inch vertical to expand his catch radius. He's sudden out of his stance, can really get defenders in the nickel of balance with different footwork and body language, roll through speed cuts with no wasted movements, but can also stick his foot on the ground and accelerate out of his breaks. He's consistently friendly to a quarterback, with the way he adjusts his routes, and his spatial awareness is outstanding, replacing blitzers, sitting down in soft spots, immediately transitioning into a secondary route, and uncovering from the scramble drill. While it's not as much down the field, you can clearly see the gear that he's capable of accessing after the catch, where he'll outrace a safety driving on an underneath completion. He can stop and slide inside of pursuits, nice stiff arm, tough with taking on and pulling his feet out to grasp tacklers. He's also a solid position blocker, so while I understand that as a wide receiver 3, possibly only on the field for 11 personnel, you're somewhat boxing yourself in, he gives you the ability to move the chains, but also the potential for explosives, and is currently projected barely inside the top 100. Arizona State's Jordan Tyson has been my wide receiver 1 since I first started really studying him last summer. He just moves like a number 1 NFL wide receiver, has easy gas off the line, slippery to elude disruption in his routes, impressive ability to integrate movements, a limited focus drops last season, and good vision to make people miss after the catch. It's all about medicals with him, which I don't have enough insight into, with knee, collarbone, and hamstring injuries at different points, costing him time. And much further down the board, J. Michael Sturdivant, who started at Cal, then moved to UCLA for a couple of years before transferring to Florida this past season, doesn't dynamically stick his foot on the ground and run away from guys, or makes a lot of people miss after the catch, but really crafty route runner who creates soft edges for himself, has 4.4 speed to threaten the deep levels of the field, and tracks the ball with sharp focus. Tight end is the class that I've studied the least of at this point that I'm recording this, which are actually next in the positional draft ranking series, but I like Oscar Dell from Georgia. 6'5", 245 pounds, true senior. Not huge by an inline tight end, but I absolutely love his tenacity and strain as a blocker. His arms being short of 32 inches, forced help to lunge, and he can lose control late, but excellent on backside cutoffs or reach blocks, great timing working combos on the front side of zone concepts, brings plenty of jolt on contact to neutralize edge defense on pin downs to get the ball out to the edge, well coordinated in space, and works hard to reposition his hands. Now, the receiving profile is underwhelming, and that's why you question, even once Brock Bowers left that program for the NFL stardom that he was destined for, why Georgia didn't make it a priority to involve him more. Between 248 and 282 yards these last 3 years, on 65 combined catches and 8 touchdowns, Part of that was how valuable Delk actually was for staying protection and giving his quarterback more time, and he has plenty of reps where he legitimately is able to slide and stay in front of edge rushers, forcing them to take elongated tracks to the passer. And then the other Bulldog tight end, Lawson Lucky, being more of the detached pass catcher. Still, there are some moments that Delp struggles to finish catches, where he has to spin around or lay out for the ball. Only caught 2 of 12 possible contested catches in his career, and is still developing a feel for run-off-the-catch situations. Nonetheless, he's an easy mover with sub 4.5 speed reportedly from Georgia's Pro Day, which you see when he gets past linebackers, but also very efficient in and out of breaks, with quality play strength, never dropped more than one pass in the season, with impressive hand-eye coordination, transitions up the field in one swift motion, and then has the gear to pull away from safeties. He's been rising pretty rapidly lately, but fringe top 100 is still fairly low for me. And then the other 2 tight ends I wanted to bring up here, Eli Raridan from Notre Dame tore his ACL twice in a matter of 10 months to start his career with the Irish, and really only had 1 full season as a starter. But even though there are some time on task issues with him as a blocker, with upright posture and needing to work to latch his hands, his awareness, effort, and early signs in a pro-style rushing attack are promising. Plus then he's a fluid route runner who naturally adjusts to passes and has good speed. And then I'm really intrigued with Michigan's Marlon Klein, Bruce Feldman's freakless guy, who actually backed it up at the combine. Unlike a lot of Wolverine players in recent years, gets a little top-heavy but highly competitive run blocker with excellent leverage and leg drive, has the wheels to get behind the second level of the defense, can really drop his weight to make sharp transitions, and has some juice after the catch. He just had a late start to football in the US, being born in Germany, and only caught 30 passes in his college career. Bringing us to offensive tackle with Max Iheanacho from Arizona State. Despite actually being a redshirt senior, Iheanacho didn't touch a football until he went to junior college, moving to the US from Nigeria at age 13 and focusing on soccer and basketball in his youth days, but started to final 31 games for ASU at right tackle, and the air is clearly pointing up for him. His footwork and the fact he ducks his head into contact at times limits how much he can actually displace defenders in the run game, but he carries his weight with ease, plays under great control, keeps the feet churning, and his impressive flexibility to stay connected with moving targets. Watching him really open up in the screen game or pulling out wide on toss plays is where he really pops. As a pass protector, he quickly gets that first kick into the ground to cut off the angle for edge rushers, does well to counterbalance and respond to his opponents, understands the depth of the pocket, has become more savvy with his outside hand to keep those defenders off balance, stays within the center of his frame, and is patient against those long developing games up front. The one thing you see at times is guys getting around the corner but carrying his hands fairly low, being over-reliant on the two-handed punch, and we'll see what happens if he presents an open chest as much as he did when facing speed to power conversion, that at the college level, his core strength allowed him to swallow those for the most part, but obviously in the NFL that's a bit of a different story. But even just looking at the Senior Bowl week and how much better he got every single day, leading to a dominant performance in the actual game, I find it incredibly easy to buy into this kid. I think he's firmly part of that Big 7 atop the tackle class, but I actually put him above some other guys who are still developing, all the way up as my OT3. The 2 other guys behind that, as I just hinted, there's a pretty steep drop-off to OT8 in this class, to where I could easily see all the top 7 guys going round 1. But then Austin Barber from Florida is the next name up on the list for me, not someone who'll just take edge defenders for a ride as a run blocker, and Big Time Power Rusher will challenge him until he adds more functional mass, but I love his pad level for being 6'7" in the run game, connects his hands and feet well to stay latched, and he regularly forces edge rushers to run the hoop against him. And Illinois' JC Davis is someone who showed massive strides this past season, 4-year starter at left tackle, fluid out of his stance and into his run fits, with that finishing mindset to put defenders in the dirt, controlled and rhythmic getting into his kick sets, with a jarring punch to stun rushers, impressive body control to recover in pass pro, but still quite a bit of variance in that regard, where he needs to become more tactical with his hands. Let's move on to the interior with Parker Brailsford from Alabama. 6'2", 295 pounds, another redshirt senior. Maybe the guy I'm first off when it comes to consensus rankings. He's currently projected to be an early 5th rounder, and I think he's easily worth of going in the 3rd. Obviously he's a clear size outlier at the position that starts every single play, since he's probably a center only and not a perfect fit for every system, but as I said in my scouting profile, he's shown me that he can mitigate those as a premier player at the position in the college game. Excellent snap-to-step quickness and mobility for the pivot. In a wide zone scheme, I have no concerns about him reach blocking the 2 technique, getting to the play such hold of inside linebackers, and even if those guys try to backdoor him, he's the fluidity in his lower body to seal them away from the action. And In pass protection, he's almost always first to establish contact with defenders in the A-gaps, with individual hand usage, effortless lateral movement skills to mirror twitchy interior rushers, and thanks to winning with pad level consistently, he was able to put the clamps to guys like Florida State's Darrell Jackson Jr., who was weighing around 345 pounds, so he's got 50 on Tucker. Of course, generally those stronger, longer nose tackles may give him some trouble if you ask him to solo block those guys in a gap-heavy system, and when you see those types of players spike into him, there'll be some knockback that could invite pressure on twist action, but that's about it, where you really see those potential issues showed up, despite pretty diverse pressure schemes and massive athletes in the SEC. Two other centers I wanted to mention here, Logan Jones from Iowa, I actually have right behind Brailsford as my Iowa 7, another shorter, lighter center who followed in the footsteps of Tyler Linderbaum with the Hawkeyes, who faced similar concerns despite ultimately going in the first round, and you see a lot of the same qualities that should help Jones succeed at the next level. Great agility, his wrestling background shows up routinely, busy hands, and identifies pressure looks like a pro already. And Matt Goldman's name rarely ever comes up, based on the state of the Michigan State program these days, and their offense especially, a lot denser frame than those two other guys I talked about, and creates more displacement with the hand placement and leg drop that he showcases in the run game, and he's a nasty finisher. His range if you set him up with more pass rushers having a two-way go against him isn't great, but his hands are inside, great grip strength, and impressive contact balance to absorb the momentum of guys with a runway. Let's switch over to the defensive side of the ball now, on the edge, with Kieran Crawford from Auburn. 6'4", 255 pounds, a senior, rarely ever talked about, having played alongside projected first-round pick Calvin Fogg, but Crawford actually outproduced his teammate last season with 43 QB pressures on 240 pass rush snaps, making significant strides and just playing with his hair on fire. He explodes into contact to make up for being more of a lightweight in a heavyweight arena, thanks for that analogy to Connor Rogers by the way, keeps a square base and applies the principle of one arm being longer than two in the run game, excels into pulling guards with zero reservations, and certainly has the speed to flatten and track down plays if left unblocked on the backside. Shoots up the field in the pass game and has really worked on his cross drop last offseason, along with the dip and rip to flatten as he gets to the apex of his rush. Off that, he can either jab outside for up and unders, or threaten that way and pull off some Eurostep moves. Plus he's dangerous as a long looper if the offense can pass him off sufficiently. Especially being on the small end for the position, he'll need to work on being more diligent with setting up and then working off moves as a pass rusher, and misses quite a few tackles because his overzealous in pursuit. However, playing that buck stand-up linebacker position for Auburn, watching how well coordinated he is in coverage, his change of direction skills, how he reads the quarterback's eyes, and the oily hips make me think he would be a complete player for an odd-front defense or a team that asks a lot of the guys on the edge. I think he's firmly a top 100 player, which is right on the fringe of currently. The two honorable mentions here, I'll start with Cassius Hall from Texas A&M, has completely fallen off the map after measuring in with some of the shortest arms in combine history, and with a lack of mass that does show up against NFL length, but plays above his weight class in the run game, aggressively shooting his hands into the blocker's frame, and using that relentless motor to create angles to the football for himself, and he just wins every which way as a pass rusher, speed, bend, suddenness, fluidity, to where a lot of the times tackles can barely even touch him. And Mason Rieger from Wisconsin, I saw a guy that passed the quarterback too often early on during Shrine Bowl week, and that's why he still needs to become stronger to finish through contact, but incredible flexibility and quickness to punish tackles for oversetting him. You saw them put it all together throughout the week, and then he was just dominant in the game, I think at 3 sacks. Plus he has big hands, attacks with low pads, and is able to disrupt run plays with regularity. On the interior D-line, I went with Landon Robinson from Navy, 6 foot flat, 285 pounds senior. When he arrived in 2022, he only weighed 240 pounds, but turned himself into the AAC Defensive Player of the Year ultimately, and that also allowed him to dominate the Shrine Bowl week. The way I put it, what his physical profile does is reduce Robinson's margin for error. He has to win the initial interaction as a run blocker, and struggles to find his anchor after that if double teams are fit properly against him. Only having 31.5-inch arms does simply force him to work overtime to get off contact, and that's it that his pass rush arsenal is fairly limited at this point. With that in mind, he leverages a shorter build to build reduced surface area, making him a nightmare to block on the interior. Navy regularly lined him up as a one technique however, where he defend the run with a wide sturdy base, and his strong arms to press off and shed single blocks once the ball carrier was in range. He mirrors zone steps and will squeeze through his gap. Robinson is capable of playing super low against double teams, but then can also corkscrew through those if opponents aren't firm with it. reportedly clocking a 1.65 10-yard split at his pro day, which would have just beat out the top mark for the tackle this year's combine, speaks of Robinson's explosiveness out of his stance in passing situations, which he pairs with rushing low. He packs a quick club rip combo, which allows him to torpedo up the field. He shows the hip swivel to pull off crossface moves and greases his body around offensive linemen. His short area quickness and bend make him a problem in twist action. He'll yank cloth and follow up with a super compact arm over to win the secondary phase of the rush, continues to fight with his hands, seek alternate escape paths, and chase after scrambling quarterbacks. He barely didn't make it inside my top 10 D tackles, which should be coming out almost simultaneously to this video, when he's currently barely inside the top 200 of consensus boards. So I give him the nod here over Grayson Halton from Oklahoma, who might have been my favorite D tackle to watch in this class, definitely on the small end for the position, and didn't even hit 1,000 defensive snaps in 4 years there, but lined up all over OU's front, quick out of his stance and win first contact, can knife through gaps or execute stunts with incredibly skilled hands. What really stands out is his ability to disengage his upper and lower half, to get past the hit of interior pass protectors, and he immediately gets to those counters with his hands, which is how he whooped guys during the Senior Bowl. He's actually back-to-back with Clemson's Peter Woods, who was a projected top 10 pick coming into this season, and with probably a 2-round difference, I don't think it's even close who I'd be targeting if I was a GM. And Caden McDonald from Ohio State, in a fairly underwhelming D tackle class, he was just such an easy evaluation, and you know what you're getting. Not a lot of upside as a pass rusher, who will really challenge the edges of pass protectors, and his pad level still needs to become a little more consistent, but a true math changer in the run game who absolutely owns his space and can find his way onto the field on third downs by creating wide open lanes for his teammates to loop around. Which brings us to my boy Jacob Rodriguez from Texas Tech, 6'1", 230 pounds, redshirt senior. Coming out of the Senior Bowl, I decided to only make Rodriguez an honorable mention because Pitt's Kyle Lewis was just flying around the field. The same happened with Sonny Styles at the Combine, when he put together one of the freakiest workouts we've ever seen. But now it's finally time to wax poetic about the guy I've had as one of the top linebackers in the class ever since I started him last summer already. All Rodriguez has done since is basically win every single college award possible, other than the Heisman, which he still finished top 5 for as a linebacker. Now let's get the negatives out of the way first. I'm more worried about banging into bodies around the line of scrimmage than stacking and shedding blocks, where his 31-inch arms come into play, and those also show up at times when he leaves his feet as a tackler and can't quite get ball carriers to the ground. However, his football IQ and instincts are second to none, especially in the run game, has the lowest end of gravity and oomph into contact to win the collision with lead blockers in the hole, but also the agility to sidestep bigger bodies and stay on track with the play. He's a ball hawk in coverage with excellent short area burst and ball skills. He had these route combinations and anticipates where quarterbacks want to go. And even though his long speed may not be top tier, it never showed up in Mobile, where he was in the hip pocket of running backs all week long. He can win as a blitzer with either force or quickness, often ripping and driving for contact. And he's an absolute master of the peanut punch, constantly seeking opportunities and finding angles to force fumbles, which he had 7 of this past year alone. He's now made it inside the top 50 on the general consensus boards, which is almost too high for me to talk about him here in this context, but if someone wanted to bring in a leader and playmaker of this level at the end of the first round, I wouldn't blink an eye. The 2 honorable mentions here, Owen Heineke from Oklahoma is another guy who really left an impression on me during Senior Bowl week, but I actually wasn't familiar with him previously. He only started the final 5 games of his career after starting out as a lacrosse player, and his lack of experience does show up in the fact that he's still more of a C-ball, gap ball type of player at this point, who overruns too many tackles, but he has impressive vision between the tackles, easy lateral mover, with suddenness to little contact, shows big time potential as an asset in coverage, closing burst as an add-on rusher. And Red Murdoch from Buffalo is an absolute dog, gets a bit of tunnel vision with wanting to embarrass blockers, and too easily allows himself to get moved in coverage, but the knockback power, getting downhill, and his contact balance in contested areas is superb. Pretty light on his feet in space, finds vacated rush lanes, and absolutely destroys running backs in protection. Plus, he has an incredible knack for ripping at the ball as well as they wrap up the runner, forcing 13 fumbles over the last 2 years combined. Now for the secondary, a first one with Oregon cornerback Jaden Kennedy, 5'11", 180 pounds, another redshirt senior, who played inside and out first at Tulane and then Ole Miss for a couple of seasons each, before being a fixture at the nickel last year with the Ducks. After arguably being the top corner of the first 2 days of the Frine Bowl week, dictating terms and maintaining control throughout those one-on-one reps, I wasn't surprised at all to see Kennedy flash all over the Oregon tape. His eyes are locked on the hips of receivers in man coverage, with light feet and excellent balance in soft press assignments. As I said in my scouting report, there were a couple of reps where he'd been near full sprint with someone but then had to stop on a dime as his man sought to kick off, but then he was able to work back down simultaneously with him, which was just wild to watch. I love what he does as a vision zone defender, digesting route combinations and understanding for where offenses want to attack them, then his click and close to erase those potential completions, and the precision with which he plays through the hands of opponents are outstanding. Last year of the Ducks, he wasn't charged with a single completion longer than 11 yards, and barely 100 total on 37 targets. And he defends the run in a way that you demand from a modern slot defender, even if he's only 180 pounds, really skilled with his hands to punch and pull blockers off himself, and can absolutely move inside to be involved in the fits because he's fearless. If you ask him to play more deep safety, Kennedy can be vulnerable to getting crossed over in pursuits. At Ole Miss, I saw a couple of moments where he lacked the acceleration to hang with speedy slot receivers, working deep across the field when lined up with outside shade initially, and he'll generally need to alter his approach to some degree playing off, where he regularly was just caught flat-footed and initiated contact beyond the legal NFL window, but a top 100 player all day long for me, and is currently projected to go early in the 6th round. Honorable mentions: Keith Abney II from Arizona State, kind of a forgotten name in this class, but my CB5, on the smaller short end of the spectrum for starting outside corner, where bigger bodies may be able to create openings early and late in the route with physicality, but he plays with supreme athletic confidence, yet also a chip on the shoulder with a rare combination of twitch and fluidity. Duke's Chandler Rivers is another guy I really like with inside-out flexibility, even though he also has sub 30-inch arms, which limits his tackling radius, and he may not have the top-end speed to survive on an island, but super comfortable mirroring receivers in soft press technique, doesn't panic when he gets into trail position, impressive spatial awareness and zone coverage, naturally tracks the football, and a maniac attacking downhill. And I do want to quickly mention Brent Austin here, who I believe is actually the better of the two Cal corners, highly competitive, but again shorter than you'd like to see. Which brings us to the final position for today, safety, and I'm going to be talking about Arizona's Trayton Stukes. 6'1", 195 pounds, actually a 60th senior, was a walk-in at Arizona all the way back in 2020, where he barely saw the field as a true freshman, and then was a part-time starter on the outside over the next 2 years. These past 3 seasons, he's been a fixture at nickel for the Wildcats, picking up 6 passes and breaking up another 17. Stukes brings solid size and nearly 32-inch arms to match up with different body types in the slot, identifies route stems early, balanced in his lateral transitions, and doesn't flip his hips early or gets caught trying to jump double moves typically. He earned an elite PFF coverage grade this past season and has been penalized once since 2023. Playing off, he takes excellent angles in the corners to receive his breaks, and in zone coverage he positions himself very well to muddy up reads for the quarterback. I think his vision and range are plenty good to be used more extensively at deep safety, and when he gets a chance to open up with passes hanging up in the air, he tracks the ball like a wide receiver. He had an outstanding interception his final game against the instant rival Arizona State, diving for about 50 yards down the field. I love his attitude in the run and screen game. He truly attacks the line of scrimmage and is looking for entry points as a tackler. Stukes looked very comfortable adding onto the box, punching off tight ends, meeting pulling linemen at times, and squaring up big running backs in the C gap. Savvy receiver is able to get him to stop his feet momentarily by throwing some false indicators at him. He can get a little indisciplined with peeking inside, giving up the sideline, and he has room for improvement as a tackler. But a team captain, earned his opportunities in special teams, and then clocked a 4.33 at the combine. I'm not letting him get out of the 2nd round. Naming Ohio State's Caleb Downs as a my guy kind of feels like cheating, because he's a top 10 prospect in most people's boards, and yet nobody really ever talks about him. Started and excelled as a true freshman from Nick Saban at Alabama as more of a rangy free safety type, then immediately became a leader for 2 outstanding Ohio State defenses these last 2 years, where he functioned more out of 2 high looks, stepping down into the box, playing the nickel. He can really line up anywhere. His physical profile may not blow you away, but his mental processing skills and instincts are as good as I've seen from a safety prospect coming into the draft in years. He may end up as my number 1 overall prospect. And Cole Wisniewski is a lesser-known name that once walked out of North Dakota State in 2020, where he turned himself into an FCS All-American before using his final year of eligibility to become a key cog for Texas Tech's elite defense in 2025. Charges up the alley of conviction, could very much see him become a dime backer and tight end racer if he's just a package player and a demon on special teams, because I wouldn't call him the most light-footed athlete in space necessarily. But that brings us to the end of this list. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and consider subscribing. Are there any other players you'd like to shout out or have questions about? Drop the names down in the comments if you like. Again, we're in the heart of draft season, and whether you're a complete freak like me or just getting into it, I highly suggest you check out all positional rankings list. Without wanting to sound too cocky, I put my scouting reports up there with anybody. I'm that confident in the work I put in and hope you'll enjoy it. Titans and safeties are coming out next week. Then we get to the big one, quarterbacks, before we get to my top 150 big boards, and we close out with my ultimate mock draft. Buckle up, friends, we're getting to the home stretch, and I'd love to have you along for the ride. Feel free to also follow me on social media for random clips of players, all the content I pump out, maybe a handful of draft props I'm betting on. You never know what's coming. So until then, see you later. Peace!